Florida, beaches, oranges, and invasive species.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
We're going on a deep dive today into the world of creatures who've decided to call the Sunshine State home,
That's right.
whether we want them there or not. And we've got a great YouTube documentary all about this called Invasive Species of Florida.
Right.
So are you ready to uncover how these invaders are shaking things up and what's being done about them?
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with ecological and economic impacts that can be felt all throughout the state.
So let's start off with a species that is causing quite a stir in Miami.
Okay.
Peacocks. Introduced as pets in the 1970s, they've really taken a liking to the landscapes of Coconut Grove.
Yeah, it's a classic example of what we call unintended consequences.
Yeah.
You know, a seemingly harmless introduction of a species can really transform an environment, especially when those species find an environment with ample resources and limited natural predators.
Yeah, and people have some pretty strong opinions about these new feathered friends. Some residents think they're beautiful and love them, but others consider them a real nuisance.
I can see that.
They can be pretty destructive. They leave corrosive droppings on cars, damage property, and disrupt gardens.
Well, and that raises a really interesting question about how we define harm, you know, in an ecosystem. Are peacocks truly invasive if their impact is mostly aesthetic, you know, focused on human property? Or do they need to be, you know, demonstrably altering the natural ecosystem to earn that label? And then who gets to decide?
Yeah, it's a bit of a gray area, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it really highlights just how challenging these situations can be to manage. Okay, so let's shift gears.
Yeah.
From the very manicured lawns of Coconut Grove to the untamed wilderness of the Everglades. Sure. Here we encounter a reptile with a little bit more bite than a peacock.
All right.
The tegu.
Tegus are a great example of a species whose impact goes beyond just being a nuisance.
Right.
These South American lizards reach up to 4 feet long and have a particular fondness for eggs. Now, that might not sound so scary, but imagine the impact on native birds and reptiles. We're talking about potentially wiping out entire generations, significantly altering the delicate balance of the Everglades.
And the documentary introduces us to Rodney Irvin.
Yeah.
A local hunter who's made quite a name for himself, catching and selling tegus. He even uses cameras to track their movements. It's pretty impressive. But here's where things get really interesting. He doesn't just eliminate the tegus he catches.
Right. Irvin's approach really highlights the ethical complexities we often face with dealing with invasive species. You know, he relocates captured tegus to other areas within the U.S., specifically choosing locations where they're less likely to establish breeding populations and cause ecological disruption.
It's almost like he's trying to find them a new home where they can coexist without causing too much trouble. But isn't that just shifting the problem elsewhere?
Right.
What are the long-term implications of introducing them to these new environments? And is it really fair to place the burden of our introduction on the tegus themselves?
You've hit the nail on the head. Those are exactly the questions that we need to be grappling with. There's no easy answer. Yeah. And it really highlights the responsibility that we bear for introducing these species in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so now our next species is a perfect example of how seemingly harmless actions like keeping exotic pets can have some really big unintended consequences that just ripple through an ecosystem.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about the lionfish, right? I've heard they're beautiful, but also a venomous fish-gobbling terror of the deep.
Yeah, lionfish are native to the Indo-Pacific region, but thanks to the aquarium trade, they found their way into Florida's waters, and they're not just a pretty face. You know, these voracious predators with their striking appearance and their venomous spines are really decimating native fish populations, many of which are crucial to the health of our coral reefs and just the marine ecosystem overall.
It's like a domino effect, right? Disrupting one part of the food chain can have some pretty serious, far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely. And these consequences extend beyond just the ecological realm. You know, consider the economic impact on Florida's tourism industry, and the livelihoods of those who depend on fishing lionfish are a serious threat to both of those things.
Right, and the documentary showcases some really incredible research that's aimed at understanding lionfish behavior and controlling their spread. Scientists are using a technique called acoustic telemetry to track their movements.
Oh, wow.
It's like putting a GPS tracker on a fish.
Wow. That's all.
Giving us really valuable data on their preferred habitats, how they interact with other species, and just how their populations are distributed.
This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
This technology, which involves tagging fish with acoustic transmitters and using receivers to pick up their signals is helping researchers pinpoint hotspots of lionfish activity and develop more targeted control strategies.
So it seems like understanding their movements is key to being able to predict their spread and preventing them from establishing new footholds.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the strategies that are being employed to actually control these populations?
Well, one promising avenue is promoting lionfish as a food source. Creating a market for them, encouraging people to catch and eat them could be a really powerful tool in managing their numbers.
Lionfish on the menu.
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept. I'd be curious to see if that catches on. Would you be willing to try a lionfish taco to help save the reef?
That's a great question. I think it'd be a really interesting conversation starter. And who knows, maybe lionfish will become the next culinary sensation. But managing invasive species requires a multifaceted approach, going beyond just individual efforts. That's where organizations like the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, come in.
Right. The documentary highlights their work in addressing invasive species, and they seem to be tackling this challenge from multiple angles.
The FWC plays a crucial role in public education, raising awareness about the impacts of invasive species and how individuals can help prevent their spread. They're also involved in research funding studies to better understand these invaders and develop effective control methods. And they've implemented programs like the Exotic Pet Amnesty Program.
Right, and that's the one where people can surrender exotic pets they can no longer care for without penalty.
That's right.
So it's a more proactive way to prevent future introductions, ensuring that those pets don't end up in the wild and become the next invasive species headache. But let's be honest, not all invasive species are, cuddly pets gone rogue. Some are downright terrifying.
Oh, yeah?
The documentary mentioned the Burmese python.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that's a creature straight out of a horror movie.
The Burmese python is an excellent example of how a seemingly harmless introduction can have devastating consequences. These massive snakes, they're native to Southeast Asia, have established a breeding population in the Everglades, and they pose a significant threat to native wildlife.
I remember reading about them swallowing alligators whole. It's hard to believe something that big could even exist in Florida.
Yeah, their impact on native mammal populations has been particularly concerning. Some species, like rabbits and foxes, have experienced declines of over 90% in areas where pythons are prevalent.
Yeah. Wow, so that's incredibly alarming. So what's being done to address this python problem? Are we sending in teams of snake wranglers to capture them one by one?
Well, it's a bit more complex than that, but there are certainly individuals out there bravely capturing pythons. The FWC, along with other organizations, is employing a variety of strategies, including trapping and hunting. They're also utilizing cutting-edge technology.
What are we talking, python-seeking drones or something?
Well, while drones are being explored, one particularly fascinating approach involves specially trained dogs that can sniff out pythons.
Snake-sniffing dogs now, that's something I'd love to see in action.
It's quite remarkable, and it's a testament to human ingenuity in the face of ecological challenges.
So we've got peacocks strutting through Miami Tegus, raiding nests in the Everglades, lionfish disrupting marine ecosystems, and pythons swallowing alligators whole. It seems like Florida is facing this constant influx of unexpected guests, but are we simply playing this never-ending game of catch-up? Can we ever truly get ahead of this invasive species challenge?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to answer that, we need to delve deeper into the world of invasive species research, explore the innovative strategies being developed to combat them, and examine the role we all play in protecting the delicate balance of our ecosystems.
It sounds like we're just scratching the surface of this fascinating yet complex issue. I'm ready to dive in and uncover what else this documentary has in store for us.
What's fascinating is how this situation in Florida, it mirrors a global challenge. Invasive species are disrupting ecosystems and economies worldwide. It's a truly international concern.
So it's not just the Sunshine State dealing with these unexpected visitors.
Not at all. In fact, invasive species are considering the top 5 drivers of biodiversity loss globally, right alongside habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, and overexploitation.
Wow, that really puts things into perspective. It sounds like Florida is on the front lines of a much bigger battle.
Exactly. And, the successes and failures in managing invasive species in Florida, they can provide invaluable insights for other regions grappling with similar challenges.
The documentary really stresses the importance of public awareness in this fight. It seems like everybody needs to be involved to make a real difference.
Public education is absolutely crucial. The more people understand about invasive species, their impact, and how to prevent their spread, the more effective our collective efforts will be. It's all about empowering individuals to become stewards of their local environments.
It's like a neighborhood watch, but for ecosystems.
Precisely, every action counts, from boaters diligently cleaning their holes to gardeners choosing native plants over exotic ones. Even seemingly small actions could have a significant ripple effect.
The documentary highlights the FWC's efforts to raise public awareness. They're holding events, educating the public, and even offering amnesty for those exotic pets through that exotic pet amnesty program. But what other strategies are they implementing to manage these invaders?
While the FWC is involved in a wide range of research initiatives, funding studies to better understand the behavior impacts and potential control methods for various invasive species. They're also responsible for implementing and enforcing regulations aimed at preventing the introduction and spread of these species. For example, they've established permitting requirements for the importation and possession of certain species, particularly those deemed high risk for becoming invasive.
So they're working on prevention as well as management. It seems like a multi-pronged approach is key to tackling such a complex issue. Speaking of complex issues, the documentary touched upon the Burmese python situation in the Everglades, and that's a species that definitely captures the imagination and maybe sparks a little fear.
The Burmese python is a prime example of how a seemingly innocuous introduction, likely through the exotic pet trade, can have cascading effects on an ecosystem. These massive constrictors native to Southeast Asia have found a comfortable home in the Everglades, and their impact on native wildlife has been profound.
Yeah, I remember reading about them consuming alligators whole. It's hard to fathom the sheer size and power of these creatures.
And their impact goes far beyond those attention-grabbing headlines, though research has shown that some native mammal populations like rabbits and foxes have declined by over 90% in areas with established python populations. It paints a pretty stark picture of the ecological upheaval these snakes have caused.
Yeah, those are some pretty sobering statistics, it sounds like. The Everglades are facing a real crisis. But is the situation hopeless? What measures are being taken to control this python invasion?
Well, while the situation's undoubtedly challenging, it's not a lost cause. The FWC, in partnership with other organizations, is actively engaged in efforts to manage the python population. They're employing a variety of strategies, including trapping, hunting, and even using specially trained dogs to detect and track these elusive snakes.
Snake sniffing dogs. Now, that's an image I didn't expect. How effective are these methods?
Well, they've shown promise, but managing a species as adaptable and elusive as the Burmese python is a long-term, resource-intensive endeavor. It requires constant adaptation and innovation, as pythons are constantly evolving and finding new ways to survive and thrive.
So it sounds like we're in a constant arms race with these invaders, but is eradication even a realistic goal? Can we ever truly eliminate these species once they've gained a foothold?
That's a critical question, and the documentary offers a nuanced perspective. It acknowledges the immense challenges of eradication, particularly for well-established species like the Burmese python. In many cases, shifting our focus from eradication to management and control may be a more pragmatic approach.
So instead of aiming to completely eliminate them, the goal becomes mitigating their impact and finding ways to coexist.
Precisely, it's about finding a balance, a new equilibrium within the ecosystem, where both native and non-native species can persist, albeit in an altered state. This involves understanding the intricate relationships within the ecosystem and developing strategies that minimize the negative impacts of invasive species while maximizing the resilience of native populations.
It sounds like managing invasive species requires a deep understanding of ecology, a touch of ingenuity, and a whole lot of perseverance.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing battle that demands collaboration, innovation, and a willingness to adapt our approaches as we learn more about these complex interactions within our ecosystems.
So while the documentary has highlighted some of the challenges and innovative strategies in managing invasive species, it sounds like the fight is far from over.
You're absolutely right. The work being done in Florida is paving the way for a more informed and proactive approach to managing invasive species worldwide. And that brings us to some of the more fascinating research that's going on, pushing the boundaries of how we understand and interact with these invaders.
This is where the science gets really exciting, right? Let's hear about what these ecological detectives are uncovering. So we're talking cutting-edge science and invasive species. Like, what kind of detective work are these ecological Sherlock Holmeses up to?
Well, one area that's really advancing is the study of invasive species movement patterns. Remember those lionfish we talked about? Scientists are using a technique called acoustic telemetry to track their movements.
Oh, right.
It's essentially like putting a GPS tracker on a fish.
So we can actually follow these lionfish around, see where they go, what they eat, who they hang out with. That's incredible.
Exactly. By tagging lionfish with acoustic transmitters and placing receivers throughout their habitat, researchers can gather detailed data on their movements and behaviors.
Wow.
This information is crucial for identifying hotspots